All right, folks, Jack Posobiec back live, Human Events Daily. Very excited to have our next guest on because he's got a new book that is coming out tomorrow, and a ton of people are talking about it. I saw it actually all over the place yesterday, and we had already been, chatting about coming on. It's Jonathan Alpert. His new book is Therapy Nation: How America Got Hooked on Therapy and Why It's Left Us More Anxious. It's just what a perfect title. He's a psychotherapist. He joins us now. Jonathan, how are you?
Good, Jack. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm super excited. I mean, just from the title of your book, it's amazing me because the therapy industry has been sacrosanct for so many years, and it was almost like you can't, how dare you possibly call this out. And you've got this book coming out saying that you're coming at it from the completely opposite perspective, that hey, actually maybe this thing is hurting more than it's helping, because we've got more of it than ever. More people are in therapy than ever. More people are taking SSRIs and other things than ever. And yet we seem to be more anxious and having more mental issues socially than ever.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? We have more access to mental health care, but rates of anxiety and depression are higher than ever. And you have
Right.
to go back to 2012 when I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times, and that's when I first warned about this, what is now a trend in my profession, where therapists are just sitting there validating their patients, affirming them, not really challenging them. And they've created this almost like affirmation or validation culture where I think is really contributing to making people sicker and weaker and ultimately dividing this country. We have therapeutic terms that have become weaponized. I mean, we've all heard people described as toxic or borderline or bipolar, narcissists. I mean, you name it, it's everywhere. And I would argue that that really starts in my profession, and I'm calling out my colleagues. It's about time we stop doing that and get back to actually treating people the way they should be treated, patients.
So when you say validation culture, I have a suspicion what you mean by that, but unpack that for us a little bit.
Sure. So, if you're a therapist and someone comes in and they say, well, I think I am a boy, but that person's a girl, you might challenge them and ask them, well, why do you feel that way? How long have you felt like this? Especially with a little kid. But instead, we have a lot of therapists who will just validate and affirm that. Well, okay, that's fine. You're entitled to feel that way, blah, blah, blah. And we've all seen where that goes, and it doesn't necessarily lead to the healthiest place for that type of patient. But it also extends into other areas. We have therapists who will blame everyone but their patient. So let's say a patient goes in and talks about their boyfriend that's a jerk, or their boss that's maybe demanding. So suddenly that boss or that workplace becomes a toxic work environment, or that boyfriend becomes a narcissist. Like never challenging the patient, asking them, well, what role might you play in this relationship issue or situation that you have at work? So
Wait,
the
wait, wait, wait,
therapists are
wait. Are
just,
you are you referring to something called personal responsibility?
I think that's what it's called. I think we were all taught that as
we used
kids,
to we
weren't
used
we?
to
But
talk about
instead,
that thing, and as a conservative, that's pretty much our entire ideology is basically like personal responsibility plays a huge role, and that we should actually hold people to standards and all of this, as opposed to this, well, society made me do it, and I had a childhood, and et cetera. And I'm not saying that those don't exist, but I am also saying that I personally believe that is what I teach to my boys, is that personal responsibility is real, and that we do all have the ability to respond to our childhoods and our society and the situations that we find ourselves in and the things that happen to us, and we're not simply subject to them.
oh, absolutely. We have control over our actions, whether those are positive or negative actions. And, you were just talking about Luigi Mangione, and he's the
Right.
ultimate or the epitome of grievance culture, where, he disagreed with United Healthcare, so he felt it was his right, his duty to take out the CEO. We see it in smaller ways. We see cities, major liberal-leaning cities, where it's okay to steal up to $800 worth of product. I remember the first time I witnessed that at Duane Reade. I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw someone fill up a bag of about 15 shampoos, and I mentioned it to the cashier, and she's like, there's nothing we can do. But we have people like AOC and Cynthia Nixon who are saying, well, these people must be in need and that's why they do it. No, they're not in need and they shouldn't be doing this. And I don't know about you, Jack, but I was raised like shoplifting is bad and you shouldn't do that. I'm sure
Yeah.
you're raising your boys in the same way. But
I
instead, we
sure.
have this.
I go like, if I see one of them and if they have something and if it goes, if it's a toy or whatever, it goes anywhere near their pocket, I'm like, get that away from your pocket right now. No, we don't do that. But I can even remember, growing up, I worked at this bakery deli in the Philly area, and I would be one of the guys, and all of us someone comes in and you can kind of see them. They're like, their hands are in their pockets. They're looking a little shifty around the whatever it is. And you could sort of spot someone before they try to pocket something. You can always sort of see the behavior. And, there were a couple times where I did confront people like, hey, let me look in that bag, and you get it back. But these days, to your point, we don't even allow for that anymore. And you're right that it's not just something that it's not just about oh, hey, this guy took a $10 item off the table. It's about what that does to a society.
Right. So whether it's a
And a
$10
country.
item, a $20 item, or even a dollar pack of gum, like you shouldn't be stealing. And I had patients who would justify and rationalize what we're seeing right there in the video, people looting stores. Well, these are big businesses, they deserve it. Corporate America is bad. We saw that after the BLM riots a couple of years ago, where people justified smashing storefronts and shoplifting. They didn't recognize that this actually does harm people, and it's reflected in the price of goods and services. If you continue to shoplift and steal, it affects the consumer. But their brains don't work that way. They can't understand that logic. They're so motivated just to get back at the big guy or corporate America. Their hatred for these it's just so strong. And with Luigi Mangione, I mean, he's become a folk hero. We have here in New York City, we have a musical that's opening in a few weeks, just about a mile from where he allegedly gunned down the United Healthcare CEO. So that speaks a lot to how sick our culture has become, where we're celebrating cold-blooded murderers. So whether it's Luigi or any of these people who have tried to take out President Trump, our priorities are so off. And I would argue that, with the people who have attempted to kill Donald Trump, they're listening to voices, and they're listening to the voices of mainstream media. We have people who are saying Trump is evil, he's Hitler, he's going to ruin democracy. So if you hear enough of that, and if that gets into the head of a deranged person, they're going to take action. And that's really concerning to me, and it should be concerning to anyone.
Yeah, no, we actually recently saw the a performance of the Sondheim musical Assassins, which kind of gets into the psychology a little bit of various presidential assassins. And you find these people who are they're either life losers in one field, typically their love life, but also sometimes professional life, where they have these delusions of grandeur. And, going all the way back to, Lee Harvey Oswald and, John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth from Lincoln, and, he was a Southerner, but of course, the war had ended, but he wanted to get back at Lincoln. And then even Charles Guiteau, getting into Leon Czolgosz, who was trying to, show how great he was, who I've written about, by the way, who was trying to impress Emma Goldman and others. And, have these grievances against the system, and so they think, well, how? And it obviously talks about the attempted presidential assassins as well, and it's always this sort of, well, the system has done me wrong, so I've got to get back at the largest and most prominent member of the system, and the largest and most prominent symbol of the system is, of course, the President of the United States. This is a fascinating book, a fascinating psychology. I want to do one more segment with you. Can you hang on for one more?
Sure.
All right. Our guest is Jonathan Alpert. The book comes out tomorrow, which you guys can get. He was gracious enough to send us an early copy. It's called Therapy Nation, and he's walking through how all the craziness that we're seeing out there today actually has a diagnosis, and it might be coming from a couch near you. Be right back. Human Events Daily. All right, Jack Posobiec, we're back on with Jonathan Alpert, and he's got the new book, Therapy Nation, which comes out tomorrow. It's going to be on Amazon, but you can also go to just jonathanalpert.com to check it out. I want to read some of the key themes of here, because it's phenomenal. It says, the therapeutic takeover of language, how words like trauma, boundaries, toxic, and self-care, right? These words are everywhere now. They've left the therapist's office and entered boardrooms, classrooms, and political campaigns. Grievance as psychology, which we just talked about. Identity as diagnosis, right? We have to confirm and validate your identity, and just the limits, the basic limits of the therapeutic. Jonathan, I want to ask you a question. Do you think that in today's society that we've sort of inverted basic mental health and basic therapy issues to the point where people are almost thinking that they get some sort of social hierarchy score by having mental health issues, and so they're actually trying to claim they have more mental health issues because it gives them something that they get to claim victimization from?
Yeah, absolutely, Jack. I mean, we have people who it's almost like their badge of honor.
Yes.
We need to get back to a time where we're not striving to be mentally ill. We're not striving to brag about how depressed or how busy we are, or that we have ADHD. Like, we should really be looking at people who are healthy and trying to be more like them. Unfortunately, we have therapists who are throwing out these diagnoses when they really shouldn't be. It's really difficult to be diagnosed with ADHD. There are a lot of things that need to meet criteria. Just because you're late for a meeting, or maybe you forget things a few times, that doesn't mean you have ADHD. And in a similar way, just because you're feeling lousy for a day or two or even a week, that doesn't mean that you're depressed. And then you can even extend that to relationships. Just because your boyfriend is acting like a jerk or he's not a good listener, that doesn't mean he's a narcissist. Narcissism is a very profound personality disorder, and the term should not be thrown around the way that it is. But we also see it in workplaces. It's a toxic workplace. The boss is toxic, or just because he might be demanding. So my profession, and this is what I talk about in Therapy Nation, is really responsible for this. We've all heard people say, well, my therapist says this. Those might be the most obnoxious words ever uttered, and annoying words. But it's about time people start to question their therapist and not just accept what they say. And part of the problem is people are becoming dependent on their therapists, and they're treating their therapist more like a friend. And therapists are very quick to create this relationship. I've heard stories from patients who are new to see me, and they talk about when they tried to leave their prior therapist, the therapist would say, well, you can't leave me, you need to keep working, you're going to fall apart, you're going to get depressed if you stop seeing me. To me, that's highly unethical and irresponsible.
So a therapist, well, and it's clear what they're doing, right? It's clear that they seem to have figured out that rather than treat the disease, you can then, or treat the disorder, you can then get more business. If you don't treat it, you just manage it. So you were here to manage the situation, and now I've got a repeat customer who's going to keep coming in ad infinitum. Whereas if you cure someone, or give them a way to actually cope with the diagnosis, or cope with the disorder, or give them a better way to deal with what they're facing, Well, then you've just lost a customer. You've lost a patient.
Well, sure, there's the business side of it, but honestly, if you're a good therapist and you help someone get over their anxiety or depression in a few months, they're probably going to tell their friends and colleagues about you, and you'll gain more business. I've always modeled my practice in just that way. I use cognitive behavioral therapy, which looks at how people think, the behaviors that come from that, and really working on getting them to think differently and behave differently. And I want people to graduate from seeing me. I don't want them to feel like they need to see me forever.
Yeah, well, I've always used the model, of course, of What About Bob with Richard Dreyfuss and Bill Murray. So that's really my background in the field.
Yeah, a little tough love doesn't hurt, does it?
No, 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 no. But I mean, that's also about trying to help someone get over what what they're facing. And the issue, you're right, is that you find also that the issue of it spilling out is that we're so quick to classify anything as mental health, and we need self-care days, and we need this, we need look. Everyone can take time off, right, and have relax. It doesn't mean you have a mental health problem. It just means maybe you're working too hard. You need to take time off. That's normal. That's just normal, everyday life. But the problem, I think, is, to your point, we're trying to almost adopt a victimhood mentality when that's actually bad for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's not how you create a healthy and resilient society. That's how you create a divided and fragile society. If every issue you might have is a pathology or a disorder, that's problematic. Part of how we grow and build character is by falling on our face and getting up and learning how to do things better. I'm sure that's how you raise your kids. But all too
It
often,
is.
we have therapists that are just validating and affirming their patients, blaming everyone else for their problems. We have universities that are doing the same thing. Georgetown University, after the election of Trump, they held an emergency mental health day where they were, I think, granting students some arts and crafts program or a day off from class so they could cope with that. And I do wonder if Kamala Harris had won, would they have extended that same service? Probably not.
No, probably not at all. And again, I love the fact that there are people now calling out this idea of validation and identity as diagnosis. That identity obviously is a complex issue, but at the same time, you can't identify with something that is a mental issue.
You're correct. And just to extend this out a bit, I've had, and I talk about this in my book, I tell the story of a black gentleman who came to see me, and he needed help with stress, some workplace issues. He had a very high-powered job, and his previous therapist made everything about him being black. She said, well, you must have issues being a black man in this work environment. He really didn't. He had issues that were just because he was a busy person with a demanding job and he needed some help dealing with that. And another story that I tell in the book is a gay man, very similar situation, was having some stress and anxiety at work and other areas of his life. And the therapist said, well, as a gay man, you must feel blah, blah, blah. You must be having these issues as a gay man in America today. He really wasn't. He was having some stress and some anxiety issues. But the therapists in both these cases, they were making gender or sexual orientation and the color of this guy's skin an issue. And that's really where my profession has gone wrong. And they're creating problems where they don't exist.
Creating problems where they don't exist. Folks,
Yeah.
you're going to want to get this book because you're going to want to read it cover to cover. I know that I am, absolutely, because this is something I'm fascinated with, regardless of how I think we've all been affected by it one way or another. Jonathan, tell us again where we can go to get this book starting tomorrow.
Great. Yeah, the book is sold on Amazon and at most retail outlets, Barnes and Noble, and you can learn more about me on my website, jonathanalpert.com, and follow me on Twitter or X.
All right, folks, please give him a follow. And Jonathan, please come back soon. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore.